On this edition of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast.
When the idea to do a short film for my church's Christmas Eve service came, I had nothing to lose. I was like, well, might as well. And when that led to the idea of The Chosen as a fully fledged multi-season show about the life of Christ, taking the stories of the Gospels and expanding on them, and the idea came to raise the money through crowdfunding, which I thought was a ridiculous idea and would never work. And the all-time crowdfunding record was 5.7 million, which was done by people with big fan bases. And we were starting from scratch, and I was coming off of a career failure. You know, that's what led to that short film going viral. And we ended up shattering the all-time crowdfunding record and raising over $10 million.
My guest in this episode is Dallas Jenkins, the director behind The Chosen, an episodic series on the life of Christ as told through the eyes of others, namely The Chosen. The series recently wrapped 8 episodes for the first season, and Dallas and his team are beginning work on season 2. The Chosen is self-distributed outside of the conventional distribution channels. It's free to watch on the Chosen app with a pay-it-forward plan to finance it. Not only is it a unique series, it's forging a unique distribution model that will perhaps become more normal in the years to come. This is episode 26. Why don't you tell me briefly how you got started in filmmaking?
Well, I grew up in a very strong, conservative Christian household. So filmmaking was never something that was really on the radar. Typically, when in the environment that I grew up in, the relationship between Hollywood and the church was quite tense. In fact, the only time you typically hear about the church in relationship to Hollywood was through the form of a boycott of some kind.
Yeah.
But my dad actually was a big movie buff. When I was growing up, I watched family films, but I remember when I got into high school, he started showing me great films, classic films like The Godfather and whatnot. And I remember when I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a 1970s film starring Jack Nicholson. Yeah. That really changed me. And my dad is an author. He's been an author, for 40 years and wrote the Left Behind books, which were hugely popular and successful back in the 90s and early 2000s. So I had this storytelling gene, but it was after I saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest that I thought, I really want to do that, whatever that is. I want to arouse in people the kind of emotion that film aroused in me. And so that led to, out of college, I got a job at the production company that was producing my dad's Left Behind books as movies. And so I went to work there kind of as a low-level secretary for a couple of years in Louisville, Kentucky. And that was where I really started to just try to learn the business as much as possible. And around the time that the movies were going to actually be made, even though I'd been working there for about 3 years, they were about to make the movies, and my dad and I were actually concerned that the movies wouldn't be very good. And so I left and we formed our own production company. And so that was back in 1999, 2000 or so. So, coming up on 20 years here. And that's when I was 25 years old at the time, and we just went ahead and made our first feature film, which was a high school football film called Hometown Legend. And that came out in 2000. So yeah, it's been about 20 years. That I've been making films.
So I've never heard anybody consider One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to be that pivotal film that put them into the filmmaking world. It was a fantastic film. It's a brilliant film.
Yeah, but I think when you watch that movie, for me, I think I was like a freshman in high school. There was a scene where Jack Nicholson isn't allowed to watch TV during the break time, and the World Series is on, and so he pretends that the World Series is on and starts acting it out to get everyone excited. And I don't know, I just was mesmerized, and I was so pumped up and so moved. And I thought, I want to move people like that in some way.
I love it. Yeah. So I remember you telling your story about Gavin Stone. That sort of led you to The Chosen. So why don't you tell me about how The Chosen came about?
Yeah, you mentioned Gavin Stone. So I did a movie called The Resurrection of Gavin Stone, and it was essentially my dream opportunity, something that I'd been working towards and hoping for years, because the movie was it was a explicitly faith-based film set in a church, but it was financed and co-produced by some of the biggest producers in Hollywood. There's a production company called Blumhouse Productions, which is responsible for some of the most famous and successful horror films of the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And WWE, the wrestling company, has a film division, and they financed it. And Walden Media got involved in the release and helped finance the release. And my church out of Illinois is where we shot it and where I was working at the time. And so the film had tested so well, and it actually tested better than any of the other movies that these companies had done before, that they were really excited about it and thought, we're going to do multiple movies over the next 10 years. And then the movie bombed. Opening weekend came, and the movie just did way worse than they even expected. And I went from a director with a bright future to a director with little to no future, at least an uncertain future. Yeah. And in that moment, I was very low, and my wife and I were very upset and crying and whatnot. But God really spoke directly and clearly. It's a very long story that I won't bore you with, but it made it very clear to my wife the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And so we went into the Gospels and read that story again and noticed some things that we hadn't noticed before, which is that it's a famous story that the 5,000 people are hungry, and so Jesus takes 5 loaves and 2 fish and multiplies them and feeds an entire multitude. But what we hadn't really noticed before was how responsible Jesus was for the need for that miracle, meaning it was actually his fault, to use that term, that the people were so hungry, and that they had gotten to that place because they'd been listening to him speak for a couple days. And when the disciples came and said, these people are really hungry, he basically said, yeah, I know. And if we send them home, they're going to faint. So we need to feed them now. Now, he was responsible for all that. And so when he multiplied the loaves and the fish, and he actually had the disciples do everything they didn't need him for. So that was the other thing that really stood out, was he had them do everything, like bringing the fish and loaves to him. And then when he multiplied it, they went and distributed the fish and the loaves. And he did the miracle part, but they did everything else. And so we didn't really know what that meant at the time, but we just knew that there was something in that story that maybe something miraculous was going to happen. And we were hoping that maybe that meant that the numbers for Gavin Stone were going to magically turn around, and that God was going to make some miracle happen with that movie. And that didn't happen. But I got a Facebook message from someone I've never met and someone I barely know, who messaged me at 4:00 in the morning, because I was up working on analyzing everything that went wrong with with Gavin Stone. And I was breaking down who was at fault and blaming myself for most of it. And I had this 15-page paper I was working on, and this person messaged me out of the blue and just said, remember, your job is not to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and the fish. And I had no idea how he knew that story was what we'd been thinking and talking about all day.
Wow.
I thought maybe my phone, my computer was recording our conversations or something. And he just said this out of the blue at 4:00 in the morning. I hadn't talked to this guy in a year, And I said, what are you doing up at this hour? And he said, I'm in Romania. I'm on a different time zone. I'm visiting my brother or whatever. And I said, well, why did you tell me that? And he said, I don't know. It wasn't me. God just told me to tell you that. And that changed my life, obviously, because it confirmed 2 things. Number one, the message of the story, that my job is not to feed the 5,000, that I'm to do my part and God will do the rest if he so chooses. And second is that he was very present in this situation, and that he was, in fact, as I thought when I read the story, that he was responsible for what may have happened. He may have actually intentionally brought me to this place of failure, so that when or if there is a miracle, that I was ready for it, and also that would know that he was responsible for that too. And so I was someone who had previously been very much about doing things on my own and providing my own success. And that's what led me, that, I said, it's a long story, but that's the reason that led to The Chosen, is because when the idea to do a short film for my church's Christmas Eve service came, I had nothing to lose. I was like, well, might as well, pour myself into this short film about the birth of Christ from the perspective of the shepherds. And it was all it was intended to be. It was just for my church's Christmas Eve service. And when that led to the idea of The Chosen as a fully fledged multi-season show about the life of Christ, taking the stories of the Gospels and expanding on them and providing backstory to these people, like I did with the short film about the birth of Christ. And the idea came to raise the money through crowdfunding, which I thought was a ridiculous idea and would never work. And the all-time crowdfunding record was 5.7 million, which was done by people with big fan bases. And we were starting from scratch, and I was coming off of a career failure. I just thought, well, you know what? Loaves and fishes. I think it's a silly idea, but it's not my job to feed the 5,000. My job is just to provide the loaves and fish and make sure that the loaves and fish I provide are as healthy and good as can be. And, the rest is history. That's what led to that short film going viral. And we ended up shattering the all-time crowdfunding record and raising over $10 million from 19,000 people around the world. And so that's a very long answer to your question. But the resurrection of Gavin Stone, if that had been successful, I wouldn't be talking to you today, or at least I'd be talking to you about some movie that I was doing with these producers. But it led to this show that has ended up having a significant impact around the world and has brought me to where I am today. And that's all because of this concept that Jesus really does, I think in many ways, bring you to a place of failure, sometimes on purpose. And sometimes he's responsible for that so that you're open to the miracle.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn.
Oh, yes.
So who was behind the idea of crowdfunding for this?
Yeah, so that was VidAngel. So VidAngel is a small streaming platform that's based out of the United States that is primarily known for filtering. So let's say you want to watch something on Netflix and it's got language in it or sex scenes or something that you don't want to watch. Right. You can watch it through this VidAngel filter. And the cool thing about them is they don't do the filtering. They allow you to do it. So you can pick and choose what you don't want to see. Mm-hmm. And they just give you the means to do it. Right. And so they wanted to get into original programming, and they are a very kind of disruptive group of guys. They're very much about doing new things. And this whole project has been new. From the way we financed it, it was the number one crowdfunded media project of all time. The content itself, it's a multi-season show about the life of Christ, which has never been done before. That's a new thing. The app that it's now available on, they created a brand new app called The Chosen, which we can talk about, but that's where, that's literally unprecedented technology that allows you to watch it and connect directly to your streaming devices without a subscription or anything. And they that was them. They've come every unique idea other than the show. The show was my idea. The way to do it, the way to watch it, the way to finance it was all these guys. And I think that's what has allowed it to get to where it is because we're not kind of in the mix with all these other projects at other platforms. And we're also, as I like to say, we're not waiting for Hollywood to lower its scepter to allow us into its hallowed halls. With these guys, they're just like, we're going to go past the system and do it ourselves. And that's what's allowed it to work.
Yeah, I purchased it over the holidays and broadcast it from my phone to the TV. And it worked like a charm from the app.
Yeah. And you use the term purchased. I actually think I'm going to correct you there because if you use the app is free. So I hope you didn't pay money for the app because it's
no, not the app, but for the season. I bought the season.
Oh, did you pay it forward? Is that what they?
No. I bought the DVDs and I got the.
I see. Okay, so you bought the DVDs, which is great, but people should know that they don't necessarily have to do that to see it free on the app. So buying the DVDs gets you multiple ways to access it, including online. But the app, if you just download the app from the App Store or Google Play, it's free, and you can watch all 8 episodes for free. So I'm glad you bought the DVDs. We appreciate that. That's how we can finance future seasons and episodes.
Absolutely.
So, people can watch it for free, and we allow that. But we do say at the end of it, we're like, look, if you love this show and you want others to see it for free around the world, and if you want to finance future seasons and episodes, whether you buy the DVD or whether you pay it forward, we've got this new pay it forward option in the app or at the website where you can literally just click pay it forward. And it allows you to, it basically gifts the show to other people around the world because streaming actually costs money. I'm sure you know that.
Right, absolutely.
But also it's how we're financing future episodes and seasons. And so right now people all over the world are paying it forward just because they love the show so much. But
so financially, you guys are making enough money to continue with this?
We're hoping to. I mean, right now we're writing season 2. We are on our way towards our goal. I mean, the long-term goal is 8 seasons, and that's going to cost probably $100 million, if not a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it sounds crazy, but we did $10 million in season 1 just based on a short film I did on my friend's farm in Illinois.
Right.
So $100 million over the course of 8 seasons, now that we've especially got season 1 out of the way, is very realistic. And the way that we're doing it is this pay it forward plan. And we probably will open it up to investment again, like we did for season 1, to allow people to invest and crowdfund this coming season. But right now we're just really focused on getting it out there to the world. The app has allowed us to get into over 180 countries in just the last month and a half or so. And it's really spreading every day and growing every day. But yeah, this pay it forward option is how we're financing future seasons. And it's going to be a combination of DVD sales, merchandise sales. People are able to buy, T-shirts and sweatshirts, which they've been loving and wearing all around. Right. That's available as well. So that's kind of how we're getting things going. But we don't have a big studio or TV network writing a big check like they do for other shows. So we're doing it all grassroots.
Well, that's great. That's fantastic. That's really remarkable. And even though, the internet world is opening up all these doors, we don't really see a whole lot of that happening, especially in the Christian film marketplace.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. We found that in the Christian marketplace, especially in media, we're oftentimes following the world's trends.
Yeah.
And especially, music kind of caught up a little bit, but movies have still been behind a little bit. Television is way behind. Streaming platforms that we're trying to catch up. The content itself, we're trying to catch up. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about these guys that I've partnered with is they're just very forward thinking. And they're just saying, no, we're not going to play by the other's rules. We're going to create our own thing. Right. And that's like the verse from Isaiah 43:19, which has been a motto for us. Behold, I am doing a new thing. And that's what we've been trying to do. And there's also a line in episode 7 when Jesus talks directly to Simon Peter, and he just says, get used to different. And that's something that we've, our fans really caught on to that line from the show. They really love that. And that's been another one of our mottos. And it's something we're communicating to our fans as well. Because some people will say, oh, I'm not used to watching a show that's not on TV, and we're like, well, get used to different. This is the future. And we're trying to get ahead of the curve here a little bit, or at least catch up to the curve. And so that's just been one of our hallmarks. And I think it's been working. And I think it's allowed us to stand out and allow this show to get into people's homes in a way that they haven't been before, because we're not using the gatekeepers that we normally have to rely on.
Right. And that's the beauty of it, because we're always fighting the gatekeepers as Christian filmmakers. And the fact that we can focus on our very underserved audience, this is opening up a door that should be open for us.
Right. And that's the thing is we're even just creating a new door.
What kind of advice would you give other filmmakers who are, trying to get their own films out? And
yeah, we've been hearing from people who've said, all right, so, what's the secret and how did you crowdfund this? And to tell you the truth, I don't think there's much of a secret other than you have to make something that people really are passionate about when they see it. And so we had this 20-minute short film about the birth of Christ, and, divine inspiration, whatever you want to call it, it just really worked. And people saw it, and we just kept hearing, we put it out on Facebook and social media, and the response was overwhelming. People were saying, I couldn't stop crying, or my heart felt changed. And at the end of it, I just got on there and said, if you liked this, we want to do more, and we can't get it funded through traditional means, we don't think. We'd like to do it with you. We also want to protect the content, control the content ourselves.
Right.
And so, that's, people wanted to do it. And what's interesting is the cost of entry was actually quite high, unlike other crowdfunding opportunities, which are typically done through Kickstarter or GoFundMe, where you can give $5 or $25 and you get a t-shirt. The minimum was $100. And this was an investment, not a donation.
Wow.
So this was SEC regulated. We had tons of paperwork that we had to do, legal fees, all that stuff. And to invest, you had to go to our website and click about 5 or 6 times. You had to initial something to show that we had warned you that investments are risky. Or you had to choose how much you wanted to give and invest. And then once you invested, again, like I said, the minimum was $100. just because it was costly for us every investment. So
Right.
we couldn't make it cheap. And 19,000 people plus invested everything from $100 to $300,000 over the course of a few months.
That's
and
incredible.
yeah, it just kind of kept spreading. So what's the secret? Well, I think the secret was the content itself was something people not only loved when they watched, but when we explained what else was coming, it was just something they really wanted. And so ultimately content sells itself. And
Right.
I think, a lot of times when you're trying to crowdfund, sometimes it's just a video of you talking to the crowd saying, please join our cause. And that can work, I think, on a smaller scale. But when you're trying to do something big, you have to show what people call in the business world proof of concept.
Right.
And I think the short film was a proof of concept that really reached people's hearts and minds. And people just told us over and over. They said, we felt like we had to do this. It wasn't like we felt like we had no choice. And I think that's a testament to God's involvement in this project, to be honest with you. Because I think he was laying it on my heart to make it. He was laying it on my heart to tell these stories in the way that he wanted them told. And he was laying it on the hearts of the viewers to get involved and to make it happen. And so, everything that people have responded to in the season 1, where they talk about this scene or this moment or this dialogue exchange was so overwhelming to me. And I just wept as I watched it, or I was changed as I watched it, or it just introduced me to Jesus in a new way. And I'm like, that's exactly how I responded when I was writing. And I felt like God, when this idea came to my head, which I believe it was from God, to do that moment or to shoot it that way, I responded the same way that you are. And that's just proof that I feel like God is just using the show as a means of communication directly to his people. And I'm just trying to not get in the way.
You mentioned that growing up, you faced resistance to cinema in your church. But I wonder why the church still seemed to be reluctant to embrace this art form, this communication form, to turn it into some sort of missions work, use it to reach those who would not otherwise be reached.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons for that. And because I thought a lot about this, I think it's especially true of the Protestant community. When you look at other faith traditions, whether it's Catholicism or Mormonism or Judaism, faith traditions or denominations, you'll see a lot more of the embracing of visual representations of the Gospels or of Christian stories. And I think Protestants tend to be a little bit more literal, a little bit more word-based. I think they're a little bit distrustful by nature of anything that could be perceived as idolatrous or too artistic. A lot of times you'll see a great piece of art and a Protestant's going to say, yeah, well, I don't get it. I need it explained. Or they do get it, but they want it explained clearly. And we're more, you'll see some of the Protestant heroes are preachers, whereas in Catholicism or other faiths, the heroes are the artists and or the communicators. And so I think that's been kind of the history of Protestantism, which I think is why we're slow to embrace art as a medium. And also it costs money, which, I think sometimes it feels like if you're putting money towards a film, that's money that could be going towards a more traditional ministry opportunity. Yeah. So you see a church and a church is like, yeah, we've got 19 different ministries we're all trying to finance, and it's, we're barely making our budget. Right. The church that I went to, when they hired me, I had already made films in Hollywood for several years, but they hired me and they had the means. I mean, it was a mega church. Their annual operating budget was over $20 million. And even then, there were still people in the church who were like, I mean, they loved the short films that I was doing. And then when we decided to do Gavin Stone, they were behind it. But it was especially helpful when Hollywood got involved and financed it, because writing a check for $2 million, whether you've got the means or not, still feels like, I don't know, it somehow feels crass to people. Right. It doesn't feel like true ministry. Right. But then you look at things like the Jesus film, which has been seen by billions of people around the world. It's been around since the 70s. I think that's one of the reasons that's an exception, is because it's just a literal verse by verse reenactment of the Gospels. And so that feels like it's the Bible. It's easy to sell. It's like, look, we're going to take the Bible to countries where people don't even read or don't have the Bible, and we're going to show it to them in this visual representation. But The Chosen, which isn't a verse by verse reenactment. I mean, we do show stories from the Gospels. We don't change them, but we add backstory and historical context and cultural context and some artistic imagination around the stories and around the people. And I think some people can easily go, oh, I don't know about that. It may feel like it's not pure enough. And but I think this show is starting to change that, because I mean all I can tell you is that the response to the series has been overwhelming from those who've seen it, and I think over time it could potentially break down some barriers, and we see people every day. I mean, literally this morning, my partner sent me a Facebook message. We hear this literally every day, dozens of times every day. Someone said, I can't truly explain how I came across this show. Might have been on Facebook. I can't pull myself away. Because of The Chosen, I have been Bible studying for hours today after not having done so for years.
Wow.
Thank you for bringing me back from the darkness. That was a woman named Kim. And I think to the people who are sometimes nervous about extra biblical content, whether it's a modern day show or even a Jesus show based on scripture, we just point them to those comments as we're saying, listen, this is drawing people back to the scriptures like never before.
Wow, that's incredible. So what kind of challenges are you facing now?
Well, if we had a couple hours, I could give you all of them. But as you know, in the process of this conversation, because we've been kind of talking about it in quicker terms, it may have sounded like it was easy. Actually, every stage of this project has been a challenge, and we've never actually gotten anything more than what we needed exactly for that day. And so on one hand, that's been really beautiful because God has shown up every single time that we've been needing something, but it's challenging to be on what we call the manna program. The Israelites every day, God would provide their daily manna, but he gave them nothing more. And he even said, if you try to store this up for the future, I'm going to make it rot. And that was because he wanted them to be completely dependent on him each and every day. And that's been the process for us. Every day we have our hands outstretched, basically saying, we don't have any more than what we had yesterday. And so we need something new to be able to finance, whether it's the writing or whether it's the marketing or whether it's getting this out to the world, finding new ways to do things when we don't have a studio or a big financier behind us. So even just for me personally, financially, I get a fee as a director when we go into production, but right now we're not in production. So there's not a whole lot of money to be made by someone who's not producing something at the very moment. I'm concentrating on just getting the show out to the world. And so, it's finding the finances, whether it's personally, just raising a family of four kids.
That's rough.
And when I'm shooting, we feel comfortable as having raised money to pay me a fee, a little bit lower than industry standard, just because we want to really be as protective of the money that these people gave us possible. But yeah, we put every dime that comes in on the screen and into the writing. And the writers, the co-founders of this project, we said to our investors, we don't see a dime in profits until you do. You have to get at least 20% plus profits before we see a dime. And so that's going to take a couple of years. It takes multiple seasons, and especially, like I said, when we're creating something from scratch, every decision we make is brand new and requires a learning curve. And so now that we're done with season 1, it's great and people love it, but we're still having to get people to watch it on the app, still having to get people to embrace this new technology and new means of doing things, and embracing the idea of paying it forward. So all of that is a challenge, but the easiest part has been when we're writing and when we're producing it. God just shows up so consistently that it's become almost monotonous how consistent he answers the call, and it's clear that this project is in his hands. And so I don't get stressed about the future. It really is just my job to make sure that the loaves and fish we provide are as good as they can be.
Wow, that's an incredible testimony, and so exciting to see that that's happening. I'm glad I've been able to get you on to talk about this, and sort of pull away the veil to see what's going on behind the scenes. It's exciting.
Absolutely.
For those who don't know much about The Chosen, can you just give me a quick pitch about the angle that you're pursuing this series?
Yeah, so we take the stories of the Gospels, and a lot of the most famous ones, but we pick the ones that we think would make for a great show and make for a great character arc, because this may sound bad, but Jesus doesn't make for a great character of a movie or TV show. If you know anything about storytelling and drama, your main character should be someone who grows, who learns, who changes, who is struggling with something at the beginning and then learns something new at the end, who comes from death to life, or faces some sort of lesson he needs to learn or she needs to learn. Well, Jesus is pretty much perfect from beginning to end. And so a lot of Jesus projects just go from Bible verse to Bible verse, miracle to miracle, and you don't actually get a chance to get to know or in turn be impacted emotionally by those who are moved and changed by Jesus. Right. So we start with the gospel stories and then we work our way backwards. So we know, for example, John chapter 3 shows Nicodemus meeting with Jesus in secret and telling him that he believes that he's the Messiah, but asking him all these questions. Well, we think, well, that's really interesting. Nicodemus was a Pharisee, so the vast majority of Pharisees were actually against Jesus. So Nicodemus had to meet with him in secret. What would have caused him to go from someone who was perhaps trapped in the religious dogma of his faith to believing that Jesus was the Messiah? And then what was it like to need to meet with him in secret? And so that he's a really interesting character. Okay, so he's going to be one of our main characters. We look at Matthew, the tax collector, who we know when Jesus walked past his booth, Matthew literally heard the words, "Follow me." He jumped out of his booth and followed Jesus immediately. Well, okay, that's interesting because, what would cause someone to do that so quickly? Mm-hmm. We know he was a tax collector, which means he was hated by society because he was hated by the Jews for being working for the Romans. He was disrespected by Romans for being Jewish. Well, that's interesting. What must that might have been like? What may have led him to that point? So we came up with the concept that Matthew may have been on the Asperger's spectrum because I know a lot about that. I've got experience with autism in my family. We thought, well, he's a numbers guy. He's a facts guy. The whole first chapter of his book is all about genealogy. And he also chose a profession that made him socially outcast. That'd be interesting to pursue the concept that maybe he's on the Asperger's spectrum. We picked characters like that, like Simon Peter, who was obviously very interesting, and his brother Andrew, and Mary Magdalene, of course, the first time we're introduced to her in the Gospels, we see that she was possessed by demons. Okay, well, let's work backwards and see what their lives may have been like, knowing what we know from history, knowing what we know from culture, knowing what we know from what we can read about them in the Gospels, and we can come up with plausible scenarios that don't violate the intentions of Scripture, that give us a good backstory that lead us to that moment when they encounter Christ. And that moment when they encounter Christ is that much more impactful when you've seen their world through their eyes. And we believe that if you can see Jesus through the eyes of those who actually met him, you can be impacted in the same way that they were. And so if you've seen season 1, you've seen our main characters, but also supporting characters, people who experienced miracles from Jesus, and we introduce you to them in a way that hasn't been done before, so that when that encounter with Christ happens, there's a real emotional connection. And I think that's why, unlike other Bible shows that I've seen some that were really great and that really moved me, but for the most part, there's a bit of an emotional disconnect.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do with this show, is that we're trying to put you there and really allow you to connect emotionally, and also see Jesus in a new way. Seeing Jesus, for example, in episode 3, where we show him camping out in the wilderness, and seeing him dress a wound and stretch out sore muscles and say his bedtime prayers, his Jewish bedtime prayers, having him encounter children and what he said and what he may have done, and just trying to start a fire, and struggling like the rest of humans would have. All of those things add up to what we believe is a compelling show that can last 7 or 8 seasons, because we're taking our time to get you deeper into the stories and into the people, like any other show. And that's what makes a show different from a movie, is you can really dig into these people's lives, and so that when those impactful moments come, they really hit you hard.
I can see how this could stretch over the many seasons and that you could keep the audience very engaged because they want to see what's going to happen in the next part of Jesus' life that they know so well. How will you handle this? What are you going to be showing to them? I think that's a really brilliant angle that you've got going. How can people find The Chosen?
Right now, the easiest way to watch The Chosen and the free way to watch The Chosen is to just literally look up The Chosen wherever you get your apps, the App Store or Google Play, download it to your phone, and you can connect it directly to your streaming device. Doesn't require a subscription, doesn't cost you anything, and you can be watching within minutes.
Fantastic. Dallas, I just have to say thank you for being on the podcast and for sharing your insight and experience and passion and enthusiasm for this. And thank you for making the series. And we're looking forward to see what you have in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It really was a pleasure. And let's do it again for season 2.
Yes, let's do. You'll find more information and links to The Chosen on the Ministry of Motion Pictures website. In our next episode, my guest will be the one and only Alex Ferrari of the Indie Film Hustle. Alex will join me to talk about his life in independent film and his new book, The Filmtrepreneur, which is a book that should be in every independent filmmaker's library. Thank you for joining me on the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast. You'll find show notes and more information about us at www.ministryofmotionpictures.org.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.